Welcome back to another video. So today's video is going to be a little different. Today I'm going to be looking at the teammate head-to-head battles and trying to predict things like the point difference, how far apart each driver's finishing position are. So instead of just giving my predictions, I actually made a mathematical model to try to make these predictions for me. So using all of the data from 2010 up till 2023, so that's all of the years using the current 25-point system, I made a model where basically I would compare teammates and look at things like their points gap, the percentage of points that they scored for the team, finishing position, and the difference between finishing position and starting position. So when I did this, I then made a standardized score, a Z-score, where I basically tried to standardize each of these different parameters. And I compared it for all of the drivers, and this gave me a score. Now, when I put these scores together into a really big matrix, I could basically compare all of the different teammate battles that we've had from 2010 to 2022. And using this, I could make a ranking, and from this, I could predict the scores for this upcoming 2023 season. So let's get right into it. So first, we have Williams.
So with Williams and Alfa Tauri, the two teams I think are probably going to be the backmarkers this year. I basically have adjusted the model because I know with backmarkers you get less points, so there tends to be slightly different effects depending on where on the grid you are. So for Williams, I predicted Albon to score 86% of the team's points, have 5 more points than his teammate Logan Sargent. I've also predicted his finishing position to be on average 1.7 spots ahead. In terms of quality, so this is a different model that I made where I've just attached the quality result. I predict Albon to be ahead by 3.6 tenths. Now, of course, Sargent's a rookie, so we don't have any actual Formula One data on him. However, I'm simply had to give him a rough estimate of where I think he may be. And even though this is probably incredibly inaccurate, just for the purposes of this video, I decided to give him a score. Next, Alfa Tauri. So Alfa Tauri is an odd one. So Tsunoda's score is so poor based on his result with Gasly that De Vries' score is actually ahead of his. So I'm predicting De Vries to get around 83% of the team's points, have about 4 more points than Tsunoda, and finish about 1.6 positions ahead of him. I'm also, however, for qualifying, I'm predicting Tsunoda to be ahead about 1.6 tenths of a second over the whole season. So those two teams use what I call the backmarker model, and this was kind of a generic backmarker that scores about 7 points. Of course, we don't really know how the teams are going to do, but going into the season, this is really the best we can do. So next are going to be the teams using the midfield model. Okay, so the first team that we're going to talk about in my midfield model are Haas. So for Haas, I actually, even though Hülkenberg hasn't been in F1 for the last couple of years, we have a lot of good data on him. So I'm actually predicting Hülkenberg to finish with 60% of the team's points and have about 22 more points than his teammate Magnussen. On top of that, but on the other hand, I think that overall it will be really close and that the average finishing position will be about 0.8 spots. And for the quality, I'm predicting Hülkenberg to be ahead, but only by 0.039, so 3/100ths of a second. Next, Aston Martin. So this is probably the biggest gap in the midfield, I think, in terms of driver quality. And unfortunately, we don't really know, as of the recording of this video, what's going on with Stroll going into the opening races. However, because Stroll is the only main driver is the main driver for this year, the main full-time driver. The model will just be Alonso and Stroll, so no Drugovich. So for Aston Martin, I'm predicting Alonso to score 80% of the team's points, and so that's about 67 points ahead of Stroll. And for the average finishing position, I'm predicting Alonso to finish 2.7 spots ahead of Stroll on average. In terms of quality, I'm expecting Alonso to be ahead by about half a second exactly. Next, on to Alfa Romeo. So with Alfa Romeo, of course, with Joe, we only have 1 year of data. So unfortunately, the model doesn't take a look at Joe too favorably. So the model thinks that Bottas will have about 73% of the team's points and will be about 51 points ahead of Joe. It's also predicting Bottas to be 2.1 positions ahead of Joe on average. In terms of quality, though, it's much closer. So the quality head-to-head last year was actually pretty close. It was only about 0.2, 0.2 of a second. And taking into account that Joe's another year older, he has a full year of F1 experience on his belt, it's actually only predicting him to be behind by about 3/100ths of a second. Next, McLaren. So with Piastri, again, another rookie. So this time I had to basically make up a value for him to put him in the model. And I think that even though he's still quite far behind Piastri, it's probably a slight improvement over Ricciardo last year. So the model is predicting Norris to get about 67% of the team's points and be around 38 points ahead of Piastri. It's also predicting Norris to be about 1.5 spots on average ahead of Piastri. In qualifying, though, it has Norris about 0.6 of a second ahead of Piastri, which I think is quite a bit bigger than it will be in the end. But at the same time, this is what the model predicted, not what I predicted. So moving on to the top of the midfield from last year is Alpine. So Alpine's an odd one. So basically, the race model, it does not look very nicely on Gasly, mostly in part because he did so poorly in his half season with Red Bull against Max Verstappen that when you look at all of the intra-teammate battles from the other drivers, it basically gives Gasly a really poor score. Now, I don't think that that's entirely a good reflection of Gasly, but at the same time, I'm not going to change the data. So the model is predicting Ocon to be ahead 66% of the time and finish about 35 points ahead of Gasly. It's also predicting Ocon to finish 1.4 positions ahead of his teammate. However, in qualifying, it's much closer. In qualifying, it's only predicting Ocon to be ahead by about 4.5/100ths of a second. Now, for those teams, Alpine, McLaren, Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, and Haas, I used the generic midfield model. So this model would predict about for its car to finish around with 70 points or so. So that's about the same as last year's Alfa Romeo or Aston Martin. So moving on to the front runners. So Mercedes. So on the basis of Russell beating Hamilton last year on points, the model actually is predicting that to happen again. However, of course, this is not just Russell and Hamilton. It also includes Russell and Latifi as well as Hamilton and all of his teammates as well. So Russell, it's predicting Russell to finish with 52% of the team's points, 24 points ahead, and finish only 0.4 positions ahead of Hamilton. So very, very close between the two. And that's, I think, probably almost certainly within the range of error. Next, for qualifying. So for qualifying, it's actually predicting Hamilton to finish ahead, which makes sense given that Hamilton did finish ahead of Russell in qualifying last year. Moving on to Ferrari. So this is another very close one. So the model is predicting Leclerc to finish with 52% of the team's points and only about 20 points ahead of Sainz. And in terms of race finish position, it's predicting Leclerc to finish about 0.37 positions ahead of Sainz on average. So very, very close in the race between Leclerc and Sainz. In terms of qualifying, also pretty close. Leclerc is predicted to only be ahead by about one-tenth of a second, so pretty close. Lastly, defending Constructors Champions Red Bull. So this one is not particularly close. The model is predicting Verstappen to finish with 62% of the team's points, which in a front-running car is about 132 points. So Verstappen would finish about 132 points ahead of Perez. In terms of finishing position, it's also one of the biggest out of all the teams, despite it being a front-running team. And it's expecting Verstappen to finish about 2.3 positions ahead of Perez on average. In terms of quality, not much better. Model is predicting Verstappen to finish about 0.4 of a second ahead of Perez.
So there you have it. That's my model's predictions for the 2023 F1 season. Of course, this is just for fun. It's nothing to take too seriously. I think it'll be fun to look back on it at the end of the year to see how it did. So I actually did this model with looking at the 2022 season in hindsight. So I made the model, but then only used the 2010 to 2021 data to try to predict the 2022 season. And it actually accurately predicted 7 of the 10 teammate battles in terms of points. So 70% accuracy, which is not great, not terrible. And it's right about the same as kind of just a person making predictions anyway. So there you have it. That's the last video before the start of the season. I'm really excited for this weekend's Bahrain Grand Prix, and I hope you guys are too. So please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and please leave your comments below. Do you think the model's predictions are accurate? What are your predictions as well? How do you think the teammates will stack up against each other this year? Thank you so much for watching.